Hi guys! On the night of June 27, the grace period for paying about $100 million in coupon income on Russian government bonds expired. The American agency Bloomberg reported about the one set of Russia's default on foreign debt. The Russian Ministry of Finance responded by saying that this was not a default at all. Economists explained why the West declared default on Russia, but Russia does not recognize it. Figured out with economists what really happened and what ordinary Russians can expect from current events. Well, don't forget to like and comment this video. Let's go! Experts agree that formally the default actually happened. If we take a formal approach, then a default occurred. We had to pay in dollars, but we cannot do this physically. We have the money, including foreign currency, $100 million. This is not a problem for Russia at all in terms of financial burden. But due to sanctions, banks don't accept any dollar settlements without dollar counterparties. After it became clear that Russia would not be able to pay in dollars, the Minister of Finance took advantage of the decree of the President of Russia dated March 5 on the temporary procedure for fulfilling obligation to settle foreign creditors, which states that in such cases it is possible to pay in rubles. However, Western countries did not count such a payment since the obligations were in foreign currency. Now Russia has been declared a real default as a defaulting debtor. But the peculiarity is that the usual reason for a default is the lack of money. But here there is money, but they are not taken. Russian Finance Minister Anton Silvanov refused to acknowledge that it was a default. There is very reason to believe that the artificial deprivation of the Russian Federation of the opportunity to survive its external sovereignty debt is aimed at labeling default. But anyone who understands the situation knows that this is by no means a default, said the head of the Ministry of Finance. I note that the external default of Russia is announced for the first time since 1980. Even under Vladimir Lenin, the country was declared a default on royal debts. And what happened in Russia in 1998 was a default on internal debts to its citizens, and even then the country paid off in full on external debt. At that time, the country was experiencing a serious liquidity crisis. Russia then was very dependent on foreign investment, and the country's economy was much weaker than it's now. The default was a terrible blow to Russian capitalism. What does default mean for Russians today? However, in fact, the default has not yet been declared. At least 25% of the recipients of money on coupons must sue, and only by a court decision can a default be declared. And when then 25% is sued, we can counterclaim that we have the money, and simply for technical reasons the United States does not accept our payment. They will be obligated to accept our claim and consider it under Anglo-Saxon law. And it is precedent that they will start looking for precedents from the 15th century, but they simply did not exist. And such consideration of our claim may take a year and a half. In the end, most likely we will lose. But we can delay this matter, and during this time there may be any political changes, because the current situation is the result of not an economic crisis but a geopolitical one. Usually, there are three main consequences for countries from declaring a default. First of all, the default country receives a junk rating from the three leading ratings agencies, Fitch, Moody's, and S&P, but they don't rate us anywhere. Secondly, as a rule, enterprises don't go to such countries. They don't invest in it. But American enterprises are no longer coming to us, and the Chinese and Indians don't care at all that we have a default on the dollar. This does not prevent them from coming to us. It turns out that for Russia, the status of a default country means by and large only a loss of reputation. And what threatens default for ordinary citizens? Here the opinions of the experts different. For an ordinary citizen of Russia, a default does not threaten anything at all, since it will not hit the economy. But according to some experts, the announcement of a default also not immediately but still tangibly hurt citizens. The foreign companies that remain in Russia will not likely leave because it is incident in decent society to hope not with an unscrupulous debtor. In the long term, Western investor will not come, jobs will not be created. Today, it has already been calculated that the direct losses from the departure of foreign investor after February 24 are about 2 million jobs, and about the same number of jobs are associated with them in related enterprises. In addition, Western goods will continue to disappear from the shelves, even those that still actually continue to be produced in Russia. But with a great degree of profitability, they will be replaced by goods from Asia. Of course, what is happening is of great importance for American banks. Fact is that CDC derivatives are very common there. This is the name of insurance in case of default of the state or particular company. Acquisition of CDC looks approximately like buying an insurance policy in a company, only the subject of an insured event in someone's default. Back in the 19th, banks and corporations in the USA really liked CDC. It looked like a very convenient tool for generating income out of thin air, since huge amounts recorded in the CDC would hardly have to be paid out to the holders of the securities. As a result, by 2009, almost $70 trillion worth of derivatives were issued in the United States alone, 4 times the country's GDP at that time. CDC are very common in the West, so companies issuing this kind of securities can suffer greatly or even go bankrupt if the West recognizes Russia's default, and this in turn can trigger a mechanism similar to what led to the global financial crisis in 2008-2009. Russian officials have repeatedly stated that there is more than enough money in the country. Thus, the head of the central bank, Elvira Nabiullina, emphasized that Russia has all the necessary financial resources, so the country is not threatened with any default. Also, Presidential Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov noted that there were no objective reasons for declaring a default by Russia. Well, Vladimir Putin himself was categorical. It was the United States and the European Union that defaulted on their obligations to Russia. So guys, if you like this video, like it, subscribe to my channel. See you soon, bye bye.